What do you mean we had to throw out 2 pallets of caramel chews because they were labeled wrong? Silas Anderson's voice echoed through the glass-walled conference room. His directors went quiet. Some shifted in their seats, others avoided eye contact. This is the 3rd product recall in 5 months, Silas said, standing. We built this company from scratch. From the first copper kettle in my garage to 6 full-scale candy production plants. I'm not going to watch it rot from the inside. He rubbed his forehead, tired. He'd been spending too much time in boardrooms and not enough on the floor. He barely knew the names of the new hires anymore. I want to see things for myself, he finally said, calmer now. No more filtered reports. I want the truth. Silas had never stepped foot in the newest factory in Indiana. It was their largest site, with over 200 employees working in shifts around the clock. The facility was open during the expansion, and most of the staff had never even seen his face.
Perfect.
He shaved the beard he'd had for 10 years, dyed his hair dark, and swapped his tailored suits for steel-toe boots and cargo pants. A friend from high school who ran a temp agency helped get him in under a fake name Sean. Just another new hire. A trainee on the night shift. No one questioned it. The plant was massive. 6 buildings, each one handling a different stage: melting, molding, wrapping, boxing, quality control, and shipping. The smell of sugar and cocoa filled the air, thick and warm. His first night, he was paired with a floor supervisor named Mason who barely looked at him. Keep up, rookie, Mason barked, tossing him a hairnet. Don't touch anything unless I say so, got it? Silas nodded, biting his tongue. The line was fast. Candy pieces zipped past on the conveyor belt. Workers packed them into boxes with practiced precision. It was loud, hot, and tense. Mason spent most of his time in the break room or yelling at people. He didn't explain much, just gave vague orders and walked off. Hey, a soft voice said beside Silas around hour 3. You're doing fine.
He's just like that.
It was a young woman with tired eyes and a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. I'm Kelsey, she added. You're Sean, right? Silas nodded. First day. She smiled a little. Yeah, I figured. You looked like you were about to melt. They both laughed quietly. Later on break, she sat beside him outside, near the loading dock. So, what made you pick this place? She asked, sipping water.
Needed a job. Heard it paid decent, he lied.
She nodded.
Same.
Been here a year and a half. You like it? She hesitated. Some days. Depends who's on shift. Depends if the machines work. Depends if Mason's in a mood. He raised an eyebrow. He always like that. Worse when the district guy comes by, she murmured. Then he pretends to care. That night, Silas didn't sleep much. He thought about Mason's attitude, about how the floor felt tense, like everyone was trying to stay invisible. The next shift he stayed longer. He helped in the wrapping unit, where he met a man named Eli. Eli was older, maybe late 50s. Quiet. Wore the same faded hoodie under his uniform every day. Worked fast, didn't complain. But what caught Silas's attention was this. Eli always stayed behind. Shift ended 15 minutes ago, Silas said, watching Eli sweep under the machines. I know, Eli said.
But if I don't clean it, it jams.
And no one else is going to do it. Why not tell Mason? Eli gave a tired chuckle. Tried that once. Got told to know my role. The next few days, Silas watched Eli more. He worked harder than most. Never took long breaks. Barely spoke. On Friday night, Silas found him alone in the break room, wiping down a microwave. Eli, he said, sitting beside him. You ever take a break like? For real?
Ellie smiled faintly.
Don't got much waiting at home. Silas leaned in, curious. Family? Used to. Wife passed 9 years ago. No kids. Sister's in Oregon, but we don't talk much, Eli said. It's just me. Silas frowned. That's rough.
Eli Franket.
Work keeps me busy. That stuck with Silas. Later that night, in the locker room, Mason stormed in yelling at a teenage worker for missing a box count. Called him useless and dead weight. Silas stood up. It was 2 boxes, Mason. He's new. Mason turned. You want to join him on freezer duty? Silas held his stare. Mason didn't recognize him. Just saw another nobody. The kid looked like he wanted to cry. Silas clenched his jaw. This wasn't a bad day. This was culture. He needed to see more. So he stayed. Week after week. He worked every station, talked to dozens of workers. There was a pattern. The good ones like Kelsey and Eli were holding the place up, while people like Mason coasted on fear and fake smiles when higher-ups dropped by. One night, during a sanitation check, Silas caught Mason skipping inspection steps. Hey, Silas said, pointing. You missed the back tray. Mason glanced at him. You think I need a lesson from a trainee? I think if you don't clean that, the caramel will crust over and jam the line. Mason got in his face. You want to try being floor lead? Go ahead. Silas held his ground. Maybe I will. The next day, he made a call. He told the district manager he was coming by next week. As himself. The moment of truth was coming. And some people had no idea what was about to hit them. It was just after 4:30 on a Thursday morning when Silas climbed up the narrow metal stairs to the second-floor catwalk overlooking the molding line. The plant was quieter at this hour, the hum of machinery steady but subdued, like the lull before sunrise. From here, he could see the full rhythm of the operation: the caramel vats, the cooling tunnels, the conveyor belts that never stopped. Below him, Eli was already at his station, adjusting the feeder arms on the wrapping unit. No one else was in yet. Silas watched him for a moment, then headed down. Did you sleep at all? Silas asked as he approached. Eli didn't look up. 2 hours. That's enough. Silas nodded. He didn't ask why. The man's back was slightly hunched, and his wrists moved with a kind of wear that came from decades of repetition. You always come in this early? Someone's got to set up. Riley's been out all week. That leaves me or no one. Riley's the second shift guy.
Yeah.
His mom's in the hospital. Don't think he's coming back soon. Silas crouched down to help load the wrapper feed. They didn't bring anyone into cover? Eli gave a dry laugh. They posted a sign-up sheet. Nobody volunteered. Silas paused. Because of the hours? Because of Mason, Eli said, finally looking up. He's been cutting hours for anyone he doesn't like. Threatened to move a guy to sanitation for bad attitude last week. Everyone's just trying to stay invisible. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Silas could feel the tension in the air now that he knew what to look for. It wasn't just the pace, it was the way people avoided eye contact, the constant glances toward the clock, the way conversations stopped when Mason walked by. It was the kind of fear that didn't need shouting to be effective. At 5:30, Mason came in carrying a clipboard and a bottle of soda. He didn't greet anyone, just looked around, nodded once, and disappeared into the office above the production floor. The door shut behind him, and the blinds closed. Not much supervision out here, Silas said under his breath. Eli didn't answer. He adjusted one of the sensors and stood back. We're lucky if he comes down twice a shift. Usually just long enough to blame someone when something breaks. By 6, the floor was in motion. The night crew rotated in and out of stations, and the first hints of daylight crept through the high windows. Silas rotated to boxing, where he met a man named Arturo, who had a limp and wore a wrist brace under his gloves. How long you been on this line? Silas asked as they stacked wrapped candy into bulk cases. 8 months, Arturo said without looking up. You hurt your wrist on the job?
Yeah.
Machine jammed, and I tried to clear it fast. No time to wait for maintenance. He flexed his hand slightly. They tell you to report injuries, but then they cut your shifts if you do. So I didn't file anything. Silas stopped stacking. That's not policy. Arturo gave him a quick glance. Maybe not in the handbook, but that's how it goes. They worked another hour before the line jammed. One of the rollers had slipped, causing a backup that sent wrapped candies spilling onto the floor. A loud buzzer sounded, and the belt stopped. Arturo sighed. Third time this week. Don't we call maintenance? Silas asked. We're supposed to, but they're short. Takes forever. Mason'll just tell us to clear it ourselves. Sure enough, Mason appeared a few minutes later, hands in pockets. What now? He barked, barely glancing at the jam. Arturo gestured to the backup. Roller slipped again. Mason looked at the stack of candy on the floor. You two clean it. Get it moving before the next segment backs up. Silas stepped forward. Shouldn't we tag it for maintenance? Mason's eyes narrowed. You want to wait 40 minutes for someone to show up? It's just wrapped sweets, not rocket fuel. Silas didn't respond. He helped Arturo clear the jam, even though he knew it was a patch job. The belt restarted, but the tension never left the floor. Later, Silas caught up with Kelsey near the packaging station. She was adjusting the label printer, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. You ever had a roller jam like that before? He asked. Only every other shift, she said, pressing a button. They swapped out a part last month, but it's still glitchy. Maintenance doesn't keep up? They're good guys, just overworked. There's only 2 on nights now. Used to be 4. Then the company cut overtime to balance labor costs. Silas filed that away. He'd approved that budget change after a glowing report from the regional director. It was supposed to reduce waste. No one had mentioned it was creating safety risks. There's a lot of stuff like that around here, she added. We make do, but it wears people down. And no one says anything? She hesitated. We used to. There was a guy, Ramon. Floor lead before Mason. He filed a complaint about safety protocols. Got transferred to another facility. Then Mason came in. After that, people stopped talking. Silas felt a slow burn in his chest. He trusted his regional managers to report this kind of thing. Clearly, the chain of communication was broken or worse, deliberately blocked. That night, Silas stayed late again. After the shift ended, he found Eli by the loading bay, checking pallets that were stacked for morning pickup. You ever think about leaving? Silas asked, watching him slide a clipboard into a plastic sleeve. Eli leaned on the pallet jack. Where would I go? I'm 58. My back's shot, hands are stiff, and I don't know how to do anything else. You know this place better than anyone. Doesn't mean they listen. Silas looked at the rows of boxes, perfectly aligned. You keep it running. Eli gave a tired nod. Someone has to. Silas helped him with the last pallet, both men working silently under the flickering overhead light. When they finished, Eli locked the bay and turned to go. Hey, Silas said. You doing anything after? Eli shook his head. Just home. Heat up something from the freezer. Sleep if I can. Silas considered saying more but didn't. He watched Eli walk off alone into the dark lot, shoulders rounded, his step slow. By the time the sun rose, Silas had made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for another blown inspection or another quiet injury to confirm what he already knew. The people holding the company together weren't the ones with titles or bonuses. They were the ones no one saw. He had one more shift to work before the reveal. And when it came, he wasn't going to pull punches. The system that allowed this kind of neglect wasn't going to fix itself. He'd built this company. It was time to rebuild the part he'd let others run, starting with the people who'd been invisible for too long. The final night began quietly, but Silas felt the weight of it before he even stepped onto the floor. There was a sharpness in the air, like the pause before thunder. He hadn't told anyone, yet not even the district manager, but he'd arranged for a full audit team to arrive tomorrow. He'd be leading it himself. He walked through the east wing first, noting a faint chemical odor near the sanitation area. A worker named Devin was mopping his way toward the drains, his motion slow, shoulders tight. "You okay?" Silas asked, keeping his tone casual. Devin didn't stop mopping. "They cut our degreaser again. Said we're using too much." Silas looked down. The floor wasn't clean. It was just wet and sticky. "How are you supposed to get the sugar film off without it?" Devin shrugged. "Told us to dilute the rest with hot water. Takes twice as long, but they don't care if it's done right. Just care if it's done fast." Silas crouched and ran 2 fingers along the tile. A thin layer of residue clung to his skin. "Have they ever failed a spot check?" Devin straightened. "Last week. Didn't get written up though. Mason told the auditor it was a training oversight and blamed a new guy." Silas stood slowly, jaw tight. "That true?" Devin met his eyes for the first time. "I was the new guy." Silas exhaled through his nose and nodded once. "Thanks for telling me." He made a slow loop through the molding area next. The machines clattered rhythmically, but there was a rattle in one of the midline coolers. He walked past it, noting the vibration, then stopped when he saw the label on the unit. It was a model discontinued 3 years ago. The service tag hadn't been updated since last June. A woman named Lexi was loading trays nearby. She noticed him looking. "That cooler's been like that for a while," she said. "Makes the caramel set uneven. Sometimes it cracks." "Why hasn't it been replaced?" Mason said new parts aren't in budget. Silas looked at her hands. Her knuckles were red and raw. "You get gloves for that?" She shook her head. "They only order the thick ones for people in shipping. The rest of us get the thin liners. If we ask for more, we're told to rotate tasks so our hands get a break." Silas didn't respond. He just nodded and moved on. Every answer tonight felt like a confirmation he hadn't wanted. He found Kelsey near the labelers, struggling to clear a paper jam. She didn't notice him at first, both hands deep inside the machine. When she did look up, she gave a tired smile. "Still hanging in there?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "You always fix these yourself?" "Usually. Maintenance can't keep up. I've gotten decent at it." "You ever get trained on it?" "Not officially. I just watched enough times to figure it out." He leaned against the table. "You ever think about applying for a lead position?" She gave a short laugh. "And report to Mason?" "No thanks." "What if you didn't have to?" She paused.
Why?
Someone finally fire him. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he stepped away and walked toward the mezzanine. It overlooked the entire packaging floor. From here, he could see the full width of the operation. The conveyor belt pulsed forward, workers moved in practiced, guarded rhythms, and Mason stood near the far wall, arms crossed, sipping from a foam cup. Silas descended the stairs and approached him directly. "You got a minute?" he asked. Mason didn't look at him. "Clock out if you're done." "I'm not on evaluations tonight." "I'm not here for an evaluation." Mason turned, annoyed. "Then what are you?" "I'm Silas Anderson." Mason blinked. "What?" Silas stepped forward. "I own this company. And I've been working your night shift for the last 3 weeks." The packaging line didn't stop, but the room felt like it did. Workers nearby froze mid-motion. One of them dropped a tray. Mason opened his mouth, closed it again. This is a joke." Silas pulled a folded badge from his back pocket and handed it to him. It was his corporate ID, still clipped to his original lanyard. Mason stared at it. "You've been cutting corners, threatening employees, falsifying safety compliance, and blaming others for your own decisions," Silas said calmly. "I've seen it all. Personally, I've been following district procedures," Mason said quickly. "If there's something wrong, it's the system, not me." "You are the system on this floor," Silas said. "And you've been abusing it." Mason's expression hardened. "You can't just walk in here pretending to be someone else and expect people to act normal." You set them up. No, Silas said. I saw the truth. That's not a setup, that's reality. Mason looked around, as if expecting someone to step in. No one did. Kelsey stood beside the labeler, arms folded. Devin had stopped mopping. Even Eli had emerged from the far end of the line. You're relieved, Silas said. Effective immediately. We'll set up a formal exit meeting with HR tomorrow, but you're no longer in charge of this floor. Mason hesitated, then walked quickly toward the locker room, jaw clenched. The door closed behind him with a metallic snap. Silas turned back to the workers. I want to speak with all of you. Right now. They gathered near the break room. No one sat. They stood in a loose semicircle, some holding gloves, others arms crossed, wary. I owe you all the truth, Silas said. I thought I knew what was happening on this floor. I didn't. I relied on filtered reports and quarterly numbers. That was a mistake. He looked at Eli, who stood near the back. I've seen who holds this place together. I've seen who gets overlooked. That ends now. A few workers exchanged glances, unsure what to expect. I'm not here to make promises I won't keep, Silas continued. But I am here to make changes. Starting with leadership. Mason's gone. Effective immediately. I'm bringing in temporary oversight while we restructure night shift management. He turned to Kelsey. You're the most competent person I've seen on this floor. I want you to lead the transition team. It's temporary but paid accordingly. You'll have authority to recommend anyone for permanent roles. Kelsey blinked. I don't even know. You do, Silas said. You've been doing it already. He turned to Eli. You've been coming in early, staying late, and fixing things no one asked you to. That's not your job. But it should be. Eli didn't speak, but his eyes didn't drop. I want you in an advisory position. You'll help train new hires and review process issues. We'll adjust your hours to make it sustainable. You've earned that. Silas looked at the rest of the group. There are going to be audits. Not to punish anyone, but to fix what's broken. I'll be in the building every week for the next 3 months.
You'll see me. You'll talk to me.
No more black boxes. No one clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the kind of place this was. But people didn't look away either. Silas gave a final nod. Clock out.
Get rest.
Tomorrow, we start cleaning this up for real. As the workers dispersed, Kelsey lingered. Why'd you come here? She asked quietly. I stopped recognizing my own company, Silas said. I needed to see what it had become. She nodded slowly. It's still worth saving. I know, he said. Because of people like you. Eli was the last to leave. He didn't say anything, just gave a short nod as he passed. Silas stood alone in the now empty break room, the hum of the machines fading into the background. There was a long road ahead. He hadn't fixed anything yet. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he had no doubts about what needed to come next. The warehouse office smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. It had once been a supervisor's space, barely 10 feet square, with a narrow desk and a window facing the floor. Silas sat inside it now, no press, no entourage, just him and a yellow legal pad that had already filled halfway with notes from the early shift. It had been 6 days since the reveal. The first few were chaos. HR had launched an investigation into Mason's conduct, while temporary supervisors filled the gap. Silas had sat in on every debrief, refusing to delegate what he now considered his responsibility. The truth was clear. The problems were not isolated. They were structural. And they had been building for years. That morning, just after 4, he'd walked the floor with Kelsey. She looked different now, not in appearance, but in presence. She stood upright when she spoke, gave direction clearly, and didn't glance over her shoulder after every decision. Still, Silas noticed the caution in her voice when she stopped by the batch mixer, checking on a newer hire who was struggling with the timing sequence. You think it's too much for him? She asked quietly as they stepped aside. He's green, Silas replied. But he's trying. That counts. Kelsey nodded, then looked toward the loading dock. Eli's already here. Silas followed her gaze. Eli stood on a wooden pallet, inspecting a set of straps on a wrapped shipment. His posture was slower than usual, but steady. The new boots Silas had sent over from a local supplier looked stiff on his feet, but functional. He hadn't said much when they'd handed him the advisory role. Just a short nod and a quiet, "I'll do my best." As the shift settled into rhythm, Silas spent his time shadowing the maintenance crew. They were stretched thin, something he already knew, but seeing them work confirmed just how much knowledge had been concentrated in too few hands. One of them, a technician named Rafi, showed Silas the internal logs they'd been keeping separately from the official records. Notes on recurring malfunctions, unofficial part swaps, and makeshift fixes. "They told us to stop submitting repair requests that couldn't be cleared in under 48 hours, Rafi said, holding up a binder worn soft at the edges. "So we started tracking the big stuff ourselves. Figured it was better than nothing." "You ever bring this to anyone?" Silas asked. Rafi shook his head. Didn't think anyone would read it. That afternoon, Silas called a meeting not in the boardroom, but in the large break area near the West Wing. Folding chairs were dragged out. Workers filed in slowly, some still wearing gloves, others with sleeves rolled up and forearms dusted in cocoa powder. He stood in front of them with no microphone, no slides. Just the pad in his hand. "I won't waste your time," he began. "You've already given me enough of it." No one interrupted. A few leaned forward. "I've seen what happens when we push people to the edge and then ask them to give more. I've seen what's left when no one listens. That ends here." A few heads nodded, but most faces remained guarded. "I'm not promising miracles. We still have production targets. We still have customers. We can't stop the line for 2 weeks and rebuild from scratch. But here's what we are doing." He flipped a page. "We're hiring 3 new full-time floor supervisors. Kelsey will help vet them. No one gets promoted without hands-on experience. That's non-negotiable."
He paused.
"We're doubling the maintenance staff. Rafi's team will train the new hires. And the backlog of repairs? We're clearing it, starting tonight." A murmur passed through the group, not loud, but present. "We're also implementing a peer review feedback system. If a supervisor abuses their position, we hear about it. And we act. No more bottlenecks hiding behind middle management." One of the sanitation workers raised a hand. Silas motioned him to speak. "What about supplies? We keep getting told there's not enough budget for basics. Gloves, degreaser, safety masks, it's always the same excuse." Silas nodded. "That changes now. We're auditing the supply chain. Every order gets logged and cross-checked. If something's missing, we find out why."
Fast.
Another hand went up, a woman from packaging. "You gonna be here next week? Or is this just a one-time visit?" That question hung in the air longer than the others. Silas didn't blink. "I'll be here every week, unannounced and unguarded. You won't need permission to talk to me." He didn't need applause. The silence was enough. It wasn't doubt anymore, it was observation. They were watching to see if he'd follow through. And he would. The next 3 weeks were grueling. Silas split his time between the Indiana plant and the main office, where he rewrote protocols alongside his legal team. Overtime policies were clarified. Incident reporting was streamlined. The discipline-first structure Mason had enforced was replaced with a tiered coaching model. Kelsey took to her interim role with quiet focus. She didn't ask for help unless she needed it, and she wasn't afraid to push back when she disagreed. She flagged 2 candidates during supervisor interviews for giving vague answers about handling pressure. Both were removed from the shortlist without question. Eli's work shifted slowly. He no longer stayed late every night, but he arrived early on Fridays to walk the floor with the newcomers. When Silas asked him how it was going, Eli simply said, They ask more questions than I expected. That's a good sign. One evening, after most of the crew had clocked out, Silas found Eli in the break room. A tray of leftover wrapped shoes sat on the table. "You try these yet?" Eli asked, nodding toward the tray. Silas picked one up. "Not since we reformulated the batch temps." Eli unwrapped one and popped it in his mouth. "Better texture now." Silas sat across from him. "You ever think about retiring?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "You trying to get rid of me?"
No.
"Just asking." Eli leaned back in his chair. "I don't know. Never thought I'd have a say in how things ran. Feels like a waste to walk out now." Silas smiled, just slightly. "Then don't." They sat in companionable silence for a while. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Eventually, Eli pushed the tray forward. "Take these to the office. Remind them what the floor makes." Silas picked up the tray. "You sure?" Eli stood, joints cracking softly.
Yeah.
"I've had enough sugar for one lifetime." In the weeks that followed, the plant didn't become perfect. Machines still jammed. Orders still backed up. But something had shifted.
Voices were louder.
Feedback was direct. And for the first time in years, no one flinched when a manager walked the floor. Kelsey's transition role was made permanent. She declined the title of floor manager, asking instead to be listed as team lead supervisor. When asked why, she said, "People talk to a team lead. They avoid the manager." Rafi's maintenance notes were digitized and added to the central log. He was given a small team and a say in equipment procurement. Eli's name was added to the training manual under a section titled Operational Wisdom. It wasn't his idea. Someone from HR had suggested it. When he found out, he just shook his head and said, "Guess I'm famous now." And Silas? He kept coming back. Quietly. Sometimes in the early morning. Sometimes just before close. Not to inspect.
To watch.
To listen. One cloudy Thursday, he arrived just after the afternoon shift change. He walked the floor, nodded at a few familiar faces, and paused near the west conveyor. A new worker was asking Kelsey something about the timing on the sealant arm. She crouched beside him, explained it once, then had him try it himself. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. The floor was running, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't just functional, it was proud. Silas turned and walked back to the exit. He didn't need to stay long. He'd seen what he came to see. This was a company again.
Not just a machine.
And it was in good hands.